This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm.
What is going on? It's another episode of the Heroic Council. I'm actually feeling like I'm speaking on a stage right now because I'm hand holding my mic because I don't know where my stand is.
No.
So I'm like on the ones and twos. I feel like I'm like DJing or rapping or performing or something. So I got a little different energy today, but it's all good.
Does it feel good?
It does feel good. I should probably do this for all my stuff going forward.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I feel more, in character or something. So this is a lot of fun. So excited that we're all here together today. Again, I'm joined with my man Tim, and today we're talking about how to interview somebody, because both of us, being in production and creating content, we've had quite a bit of experience when it comes to interviewing people, and it's also a skill that we are both wanting to grow and develop more in. So we're excited to jump into this topic today and get more insight from each other, from how we can be better interviewers, and maybe there's something that you all who are listening today can take from and use in your own ways when you're interviewing someone, whether it's for a podcast or you're creating content, or you're just doing something on the fly with somebody. I think it actually works great for communication, period, because it's about asking questions and stuff. But that's the focus for today. So how you feeling today, Tim?
I'm feeling pretty good. I feel relaxed after a nice long Thanksgiving weekend.
True that.
Yeah. How was your Thanksgiving, by the way?
It was great. Yeah. None of my friends let me make any of the major dishes, so
that's cool.
I guess they don't trust me yet.
So. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Never mind. I thought they were giving you a break.
Yeah. So I'm basically like chopping everything and doing all the prep work, which is like bullshit, but it's okay.
Oh, they had you do it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the little sister jobs,
Yeah.
But it was a good time.
Go
ahead.
I was on turkey duty this year. It was
Okay.
the first time. It was edible. So that's all you can ask for with the turkey, right? Yeah.
Well, edible is good. People ate it.
Yeah, people ate it. Yeah,
and they're still
I'm
alive
still eating
today.
Leftovers. Yeah.
And everybody's alive. All right, so
yeah,
you did a good job, man.
Like I said, it was serviceable. That's
That's awesome. So let's jump into this. Yeah, let's jump into this this topic here. So, what's been your experience with interviewing people? Like, to what extent have you done that so far, and what's been your experience?
So, I've been doing interviews like the very first. Was it the very first? No, it was probably like the second commercial video that I had ever produced was in an interview format. And I'm going to say, like, I've probably done over 100 videos in that format. And so I've had the opportunity to try out a lot of things, see what works, see what doesn't. I've had like a lot of different personalities that I've interviewed. Some people who are very charismatic on camera, some people who really struggle communicating on camera, both, in the production side of things and in the post-production side. I think editing for interviews is really interesting on the post-production side because it's like has some elements of documentary style in it, and you kind of like are able to like put the story together a little bit, the narrative together a little bit in post, which is cool. So I've tried a lot of different things, done a lot of different things in interviews. I enjoy the interview scene. Yeah. Where are you at?
I would say the same thing. It was really just being on set with people and realizing, okay, I got to get this person to say some stuff, but I got to give them some questions. So
yeah,
it just like I just kind of had to sit down and be that person, whether it was from behind the camera or eventually like being seated across from them and asking them questions. I also found too that like some of the questions that I would ask, my intention behind it was just to make them more comfortable, to get them used to just being in front of the camera or whatever, because people jump on and they're like really nervous, they're kind of jumbled, their energy isn't calm. And I just come with a few questions that I know I'm not really going to record per se, but it's just some things to get them warmed up and talking and just feeling a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have found that like oftentimes getting them into a more conversational speaking tone where it feels like they're communicating directly with me instead of the camera, or like directly with maybe somebody else who I have as proxy for, like, okay, when you're having this conversation, you're having this conversation over here with this person, just so they're kind of like not super preoccupied with the fact that a black void of a camera lens is staring down into their soul. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
I feel like for anyone that's like, tough. So getting them feeling like they're actually legitimately talking with me is, I've always found like super, super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. Because you're right. When somebody's sitting there staring in the lens, there's so many emotions and things going through their head. And for anybody who is interviewing that person, it's really your responsibility, I feel, to guide them, in how what they say comes out on camera and how they even feel, how they show up, I think ends up being part of our responsibility as well, or whoever is doing the interviewing, because, that person's in a different state. So you want to make sure that they're comfortable and all that stuff and to be prepared. So let's talk. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I haven't done that many interviews this year. This is probably like I've done way more concept stuff this year than I've ever done in my entire
Okay.
life. So like that's cool. That's been really cool. But I was actually just thinking over the last couple of weeks, like because I would say like I got fairly good at interviews to the point where like I was. We'll probably get into this a little bit more later. But when I'm like when we're asking questions, I would start to like frame questions in certain ways where I could get some interesting material that I don't think I would have been able to get otherwise. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe, sorry, I feel like this is going to branch off into a whole different thing. So like, I'm not sure what your next question was. It was just something that popped in my mind while you were talking about that.
No, it's I think that it's like when you're in that role, you really have to be present, I feel like.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Is that where you were kind of going or thinking?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Yeah. Because like you have like questions to kind of like move it along, but a lot of times you discover new questions when you're listening, and being an inquisitive person is really essential to being a good interviewer, because the meat of what they're trying to say, they might not even think that it's important. You know what I mean? So you like really digging around their brain, you know what I mean? Once they get comfortable on camera, could be huge in your post-production because it can give you access to a lot more, you know what I mean, than you might have otherwise. Yeah.
I know. I love it when it's like they're talking and I'm like, they don't even know how good they sound right now. Like these are perfect sound bites, like it's really, really good. I just started my own podcast this year called The Author's Leverage, and I noticed.
Oh, by the way, congratulations!
Thank you.
I love the concept and all the design work you guys have been doing for it is really great. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And in that process, I've had some interviews I would say that are big interviews, right? Because of who it was that I was talking to. And I was incredibly nervous, and I started like actually preparing all these questions to ask them, and I had them up on my computer screen to bring up and talk about. And some of the questions were important, but what I found in having done is probably close to maybe 13 or 14 episodes now, that when I did not have questions laid out, the conversations went a whole lot better. Versus with what you just said, to challenge myself to be more present in the conversation and allow what they said to, spur the next piece or whatever, and just flowing with it. It was definitely scary, and I still admit sometimes it's scary, but it's like I have to do that in order for the conversation to be, more relatable, more natural in terms of how we talk through it, as opposed to me just like going from one question to another. Whereas when I just kind of went with the flow, the questions connected, to what was said before or something like that. Or sometimes that was years, but
Have you found that some of your guests are that you've had on are guests that are generally more comfortable speaking, or do you find them to be a little bit of a mixed bag?
Most of them, I think, they seem to be pretty comfortable
Yeah.
speaking on camera and stuff like that. So I didn't really run into any of those challenges or anything like that with them being nervous or not being familiar with, how to be on camera, how to be in an interview. So that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because yeah, I would like to say that I always come like with a nice little list of questions that I'm gonna ask, or like I think typically like a lot of times what I'll try and do, like let's say hypothetically I have a client and the client is like, this is what we're trying to communicate in this video or this project that we're building. So like it's important that we get these things. So I think like it's always important for me to have like to always like have my head like eye on the prize as far as like what are we really trying to accomplish here when I go into those interviews, and make sure at the very least that I get those basic like bread and butter talking points out of the way. We may not even end up using those like really like like, okay, they really need this person to say this, because we ended up getting something better when we really started to dig in. But like for me at least, like I just want to make sure like I always have like, this is my goal coming in out of this. This is what we're gonna, you know what I mean? Like this is how we're gonna like present things to the audience in general. And then once I kind of have those done, that's when I start like, that's when I start probably more enjoying the interview a little bit, because it's more like, okay, let's dig into some of these interesting things that you started mentioning in those opening conversations that we had.
Right.
Yeah, and also like I feel like once you kind of get into that zone with the interviewee, they end up, if they are a little high, like a little bit more sensitive around cameras, that's when they might like forget the camera's there, and they'll relax and they'll get into a story, and then their focus is more on like the story that they're trying to communicate at that point. And a lot of times like there'll be like more like sentimental notes, you know what I mean? Like they'll be very it'll just have like a little bit more, it seems like when they dig in they get a little bit more emotional, or like bring up things that are a little bit more emotionally resonant, and seem to be, I guess, a little bit more captivating on camera, or like I guess different mediums than we're typically talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just brought up there's different mediums, right? So we're talking all the way from podcast interviewing to interviewing on camera. And I don't know if you've played around on Clubhouse or not, but there's like, an interviewing aspect that comes together there when you're on that platform. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I just want to add one more too, because I have been doing web projects recently, and in like UX research, like user interviews are an important focus a lot of the times. So being able to really dig in, because like for instance, let's say hypothetically I'm asking somebody, I'm asking somebody a question. Their first response might be a little bit like obvious. And not only that, but typically maybe a little bit vague. And not only that, but you don't necessarily like, people will use words, you know what I mean? And like, they're kind of maybe broad words, or like, and then you start digging around, you're like, oh, they meant something else than what I thought they meant when they said that. And when they said that, they might not have, this is a little vague on my side, but like when they said that, they may not have even really meant what they said. They were just saying that because that was what initially popped out of their brain. And when you dig around, they actually meant something else, and they felt something else when they were doing that. And that's important when you're trying to like discover like, oh, like, how did you feel about using this platform? Because like, although they said this, they really meant this, and what they meant is way more important than what they said.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I find that really at the beginning of any conversation, and I've started to be more intentional about this, is to start with an intention and ask, like, what is it that we're looking to accomplish here? What is our goal? Because usually, like, before I even start a podcast interview, I ask, like, what's important for you to share? What's your intention in being on the show? And learn that actually from Oprah. Before any interview that Oprah ever would do, she would ask the guests, it could be Beyonce or the mother who's being featured or whatever. She would always ask them, like, what's your intention? And then go forward from there. So I find that that's always like a helpful tone, just to get on the same page before you start talking.
That's cool that she would um, consider that as as something
Because then
that's
she would
important
know
to
where
her
to sort
guests.
of she would know where to direct, and how to guide her questions to
Yeah,
make
yeah,
sure
yeah.
that they're on the same page, and no lines are being crossed or anything like that when it comes to
I also
topics or things that
imagine
are off topic.
the kind of projects that you're doing for a living, like when you're in the process of your discovery phase, I imagine those interviews that you do there are also super important, because I imagine like their potential, how they potentially see this going could go in a lot of different directions for them, and they may not even really know what they want yet.
Yeah, and you gotta get clear on that first, and then go forward. I mean, we filmed with Sarah a few weeks ago here, which went so good, and I'm excited she's gonna do some more
Yeah,
stuff with you.
those look. Yeah.
Yeah, she before we even started that shoot, I had everybody on set. All right, everybody, what's your intention for today? What do you want to see happen? What do you want to accomplish? And it just really, again, set the tone for how the whole day went, and so I just find that that's such a great place to start,
Yeah, and I imagine too that like everybody like communicating that early on makes like everybody feel really heard, or at the very least they have an opportunity to be heard, and that like and it definitely would probably bring like a more positive energy overall to the what I mean, to the overall like piece that's being made. Do you think that makes sense? Like, let's say hypothetically, I'm I'm working on a project for a client, you know what I mean? Let's say hypothetically we're making like a little brand video or something, and we want to talk about you know what I mean, what they're selling, or something like that. Or maybe it's more like focused on like, oh, what is it like to work here, or something like that. And you start like interviewing the employees and stuff. Now we know the person who hired you for the project wants something, maybe something pretty specific, you know what I mean? And do you think it makes sense then to like ask the employees like what is important for them to get out of this interview? You know what I mean? Like if you're or the people you're interviewing anyways for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, in fact, just to make sure we're on the same page, just say, hey, Bob in HR, he's
Mm-hmm.
heading this up, and it's really important for him to showcase, the fact that we're a caring group of people. So I know that that's important to him. What's important to you in this conversation?
I like that.
That
Yeah,
way it
yeah, yeah.
connects. You know what I mean? They know the
Yeah,
intention of the
yeah.
person, and then they're considered also in that way. And like you said before, it makes everybody feel heard, you know, in a different way.
Yeah.
They don't just feel like, oh, I'm just here just to do whatever Bob says. It's like they're actually, feeling a lot more, collaborative and a part of the project as well.
Yeah,
And
no,
in
I
a
like
greater
that
way.
a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the
So,
other thing I noticed. Like a lot of people will come in for those things. You know what I mean?
mhm,
They work there, and a lot of them are like, "Oh, can I just get paid to do my job?" You know what I mean? Like when they come into those things, because they're
yeah,
like, "I'm gonna be on camera because I like my manager or whatever." But do I really have to? You know what I mean? So like,
yeah.
I can see that as being like I'm going to incorporate that from now on. Yeah, as a
It's
thing that I
huge.
do.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And I know for me sometimes too, when it comes to sort of the pre-work that goes into the interviewing is, doing a little bit of research sometimes. So I
Hmm.
find that if I'm able to, get some insight on the person, I'm not coming to the table with like no idea of, who they are or what they're about or whatever. So I think it's important to do some level of research, check them out on
Yeah.
social media, see the things that they care about or whatever, and bring it up in the interview. I mean, I find that to be really big. One person we interviewed, his name was Tyler Wagner, and he got into book publishing and book marketing because he read that 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And
Hmm.
I'd read about that before. So when I came to the interview, instead of me saying, "So how did you get into book publishing?" I said, "So I heard you read the 4 Hour Work Week, and that got you into publishing. Like, what was it about that book?" I didn't go
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
talked about. I just tried to create a new lane on the topic that went deeper. Plus, showed him that I know something about him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that this is going to be a good conversation. People feel like, "Dang,
Yeah.
like she looked me up. She knows what I'm into," and it makes them feel that much more excited. They feel more connected with you because you've demonstrated that you know something about them.
Also, like, I don't know if you're this kind of person. I don't know if I could ever be this kind of person, but like, I always really respect those interviewers on like, let's say it's like a talk show or a podcast or something, and they've actually read the book of the author like
Yeah.
ahead of time, and
Yeah.
they know the book like really, really well. And I feel like Jeff is probably a lot of the times one of those people,
Yeah.
because he just reads so much.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, because like I especially if it's an interesting topic, you're gonna want to be able to dive deep into that particular conversation. I guess depending on what the goal of the interview is, of course.
Yeah,
Like,
and there's a lot of
yeah.
things you can do. I mean, reading a book can be pretty intense in terms of the time
Yeah.
requirement to do it. But sometimes I'll look up and see, have they done a TED Talk? Have they done some
Yeah.
other video online? And I just try to check out a little bit about their style of how they present, how they talk, how they communicate, and try to get an idea of their subject matter from video. So sometimes I do that too, for sure, instead of reading an entire book, because that can be a lot for sure.
Now, this isn't something you probably have the luxury of doing generally on podcasts, because podcasts are more like you're recording it and just like going with the conversation. But like if you're doing a video interview like you did with Sarah a couple weeks ago, you have a lot more opportunity to like, okay, let's cut it here and let's redo that. You know what I mean? Or let's like ask that question again and frame it in a different way or something like that. Is that something that you do when you're recording a lot of these pieces that you're doing for your clients? I can rephrase that if that doesn't make any sense.
So, no, yes, I see what you're saying. Like basically, like if I felt like they could have said it better, or they didn't quite hit the soundbite that I'm looking for, sometimes I'll either reword the question, or sometimes I'll just try to go deeper, just because my intention when I'm interviewing is I like to try to just keep it conversational instead of being like, all right, cut, could you say that again? Like just repeat what you said. It just kind of breaks the flow sometimes, unless it is something very specific that we need. If it's like a scripted thing, I need you to say these exact words, then there I feel like I'm able to direct more and say, all right, let's just take it from the top. Let's do it again. This time, like, use your hands a little bit more. Let's get some more energy into this. But if it's more like interview based and I'm just like getting through the conversation or whatever, then I'll have them just answer it, but I just spin the question a little bit. Or because this is something that a lot of people do too. If you ask them like, so how did you get started in your business, right? Start with that question.
Yeah.
Some people will start off like, I went and got a business license, and then they go right into it. But sometimes you want that preface to be like, well, this is how I got started in business, or this is what, and then they can, so it'll be easier to use in post, So sometimes I might have them
absolutely.
repeat it, but other than that.
No, I guess that's something that I was having a lot of people when they're framing their answers, like, I'm going to ask you a question. And then like, you know what I mean? When you give it back to me, because, oftentimes the interviewer is not going to be in the frame and they're definitely not going to have audio.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you're going to want them to like, can you reframe the question back to me when you answer it back? But I was thinking like, because for instance, I was working with this client, actually this was this year. So I did have an interview this year. I was working with a client and they were, we're putting together a brand video for them. And I never worked with them on camera before, so I didn't know how they felt in general about being on camera. And we were doing a bunch of their material too. Like in general, we were building their brand identity and stuff like that. And one thing that we were trying to do is, because they're in a relatively saturated market, and so we're trying to figure out like, okay, well, what makes you different? You know what I mean? Why are people going to be attracted to working with you? We were working on a lot of different exercises to kind of get there, but man, yeah, I must have spent like a lot of time on this just because like I just felt like we weren't getting there because it was just like a super oversaturated market, and you want to be like it's important to be really clear, you know what I mean? Especially if you only have like, let's say 30 seconds or a minute on a video, you know what I mean? And I feel like a minute nowadays is pretty gratuitous on the amount of time you might get to make a pitch to somebody. But so you don't have a lot of time, and they service a few different, you know what I mean, a few different like, let's say, user groups, you know what I mean, or potential customers. They service them in a couple different areas, and and yeah, creating like a really cohesive story sometimes can be a little difficult to do on the fly when you're doing these interviews. Sometimes it's super easy. I don't always know why. Sometimes it's like super easy, even when you're getting together like 10 different people. Like for some reason, sometimes that's super easy, and sometimes you're like I don't know. It's just really hard. And with this person in particular, I guess one thing was I didn't expect them to be so nervous on camera. Just because like when I talk to them generally, they're like super confident and they're super clear communicators. And then they got on camera and their stories became like long, confusing tangents. I love this person, by the way. I'm not shitting on this person. They're great at what they do. They're just like, once they got on camera, they just like long tangents. And like, even as I was listening, I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to edit this together. And like, just because, I'm trying to think of where I was going with this question to begin with, because this is one of the harder interviews that I've done recently. And the end product was pretty good. And because it ended up being like, I just like did a lot of, I think in post, I did like, I know you're not supposed to, fix it in post, but I did a lot of like, you know what I mean? Like cuts and stuff where like I essentially created the message. Do you ever run into situations like that where you're like, end up like almost like putting the entire interview together in post, where you're like, I'm going to take this sentence from here.
Sometimes you really have to do some magic work to make whatever was just said into something that is cohesive and flows really well. So I know exactly what it's like to take like 20-30 minutes of interview for which we only needed like a minute, you know what I mean, and try to make some kind of story out of it. So it can definitely be a challenge for sure. And in those cases where the person is going on and on, it's like you do have to, because you're the director, right? If you're the one who's interviewing somebody, ultimately you're the one who's guiding and navigating this ship. So at some point, you gotta find a, and it's hard because I don't like cutting people off, you know what I mean? But if they're going one direction, it's like, oh, cool, all right, great, yeah, that's really good. Like, what about this? And then I just try to divert.
Because a lot of times it is legitimately good. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're like, this is like a really interesting story, but like we only have 30 seconds to tell the story.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
and as the interviewer, you're essentially the creator of it. In a lot of cases, you're part of the content creation process, and you really have to, I think, take that role pretty seriously too. I mean, because especially if you're doing a video interview and you're on set, we have a schedule to keep to, or else we're going over budget, or going over time, so it really has, like, all those parameters in place, make a huge difference. And you just have to, and I find this even if I'm interviewing for a podcast, it's like I'm thinking about the end, whatever it is, the end clip, the end video itself. And especially for podcast interviews, what I've been practicing more of, and this is a great tip for anybody who's listening, is to think about what somebody would search for online, on Google, on YouTube. Think about what question they would ask, and ask that question to your guest. And that becomes a really good searchable.
That's cool. Snippet. I like that. Yeah.
Because it's a frame of mind that you have to be in when you're interviewing somebody, but it's kind of like you're driving the ship and you're collecting gold. You're collecting gold along the way. But if you can define that gold, or if I should say, if you can define that ahead of time by doing a little bit of research, you can ask some really poignant questions that will bring more attention to your conversation.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's perfect. And oh, man, I think also the benefit today, like generally how like my projects work is we have like kind of we're doing both like something like that's a little bit more of a longer cut, maybe something for YouTube or on a platform where it kind of makes sense to have something more expanded, or their website, because I feel like if you're shopping around and you want, you know what I mean, like let's say you're looking for this kind of person to help you with this thing, then you're more like you want to get to know the person if you're legitimately considering them. So then I think in that circumstance it makes sense to have kind of like a longer format thing. But then you have like generally like, okay, well, how do you get people onto their website to begin with, or onto the platform that they're selling the thing? So you're going to need something for social, and that's where like shorter social cuts like
Right.
make sense.
Right.
And I think that's like amazing for like if you want something like that. I think that's such a cool idea. See, I think like I know you already have like a super awesome business, but you would make a great like UX designer too, because that's generally how you need to think
I'm
about like
open,
everything.
man.
Yeah.
I'm open.
Yeah.
My I'm open to learning more about that stuff too, in fact, because it's interesting. It's very engaging with the person to um, figure out what would make the best experience for them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's where I'm always at, even when it comes to interviewing. It's like if you're interviewing somebody, you want them to have a really good experience. You don't want them to feel like, you ask stupid questions, or essentially they're not stupid questions, but you didn't ask very well thought out questions, or you were not even focused yourself, or you weren't interesting. Because I learned this from Jeff. He said, like, the number one thing that we have to keep in mind if you're interviewing somebody is to just be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Be in that state of curiosity, and that's what's going to make it be that much more natural and make for a better experience for the person you're interviewing.
Yeah, one of my I don't know how this comes off, but I feel like I say this a lot when I'm interviewing people. I'm literally like, oh wow, that's so interesting. As I'm like taking a note, I'm just like, that's very interesting. And tell me more about that.
I know sometimes that's really hard. I'm trying to get better at that myself, instead of like after they say something good being like, oh cool, okay, next. It could be really awkward. But just finding a way to basically acknowledge what they said, and then steer to the next question, or go deeper, like you said. Tell me more about that. And sometimes
I was gonna say, like, I just want to say, like, one of the things that I've found really helpful is it really goes back for me to like people say things a lot, and I think it's like we're automatically like when I say like, let's say I say like I'm trying to think of an example, like I say a word like, oh, like I had a really like okay, I want to say sorry, okay, so like a lot of people will say things and they'll use a word and you think you know what that word means when they say it. And there's a good chance that you didn't really know what that said, because it was kind of a broad word and they may use it in a context where it makes sense to them, but for you, your brain doesn't automatically go there. So it might make sense to really dive down into what they're saying and even like repeat it back to them. Okay, and how you think you took it, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So a lot of times, like, yeah, I'll when I'm doing interviews, I'll always want like consent from them that I understand what they just said.
That's huge.
And that for me, that's really helpful. Yeah,
that's huge. I remember hearing Will Smith. He was asked in an interview, "What is a rule that you think should be enforced across the board for everybody on the planet?" And he said the rule would be that after somebody tells you something, you have to repeat back what you heard them say.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, that would bring so much more freaking peace to this world, like crazy, just because people would, have more they would be heard, and the other person would actually understand what they said and what they meant, instead of going off on an assumption, right?
And repeat it in a back in a way that repeat it back in a way that's like a little bit different, or in your own words.
Yes.
Yeah, because like if you just repeat back the exact words you said, that really doesn't mean anything.
No.
But I'm gonna try and break down what you just said in
my
a
own
slightly
words.
more detailed way. Yeah, and you tell me if that still makes sense to you.
And when you do that, they actually go deeper into what into the topic itself. So basically, Tim, what you're saying is that when you dive deeper into this and that, this is what happens. You're like, yeah, that's exactly it, because and then they'll just
Yep, yep,
going.
yep,
And then,
yep,
so
yep.
sometimes it's actually been a much better
Or
way.
even better, they'll say like, no, that wasn't it at all. And then they'll go, you know what I mean? And then and then it might just like blow your mind. Cause I feel like when I'm wrong, usually my mind's blown because I never thought to think of some of their experience that they had that way.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly. That's actually such a big point, is to just repeat back what you heard instead of being like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay. And then, because it just kind of feels like it breaks the rhythm a little bit. But when you can repeat back what you heard them say in your own way, they get the affirmation that they've been heard, and it just keeps the conversation moving forward.
Gotcha. Yeah. 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 I mean, and I'm sure like you get this too. It's like, it's not always like, oh, they said something obvious, but maybe like they said something really complex and you want to just like, be sure like, oh, was I even able to wrap my mind around what you just said right there?
Right.
You know what I mean? And
like break it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the thing is, if you don't understand it as the interviewer, then there's a big chance that whoever's watching this later or listening to this later is going to have a similar, question or uncertainty. So if you're able to be in the mind also of the person who would be seeing this, then maybe some things would be unclear, some jargon that they just used, some term that they know like the back of their hand, the person interviewing, but the rest of the audience wouldn't. So sometimes it's like, so we just want to make sure you understand when you say whatchamacallit, what exactly is that? Because some people have different understandings of whatchamacallits. I'm talking about a chocolate bar, whatever. So break it down,
Yeah.
Makes a huge difference. But what I love about interviewing, and I think we kind of talked on this a little bit before, but it's like, you hit this sweet spot when it's like they forget that the cameras are there. They forget that they have technology in front of them, like a mic or lights or whatever, and they're just in their element. And I love those moments. And I think over time, being on set and just working with different people, my intuition is kind of built up in that way to where I can just sense when people are confident, they're in their flow, they're doing their thing, versus when they're just nervous and they're conscious about, overly conscious about what they're saying and all that stuff. But I love it when that switch comes on and they're like just flowing now.
And that's something like I got some footage for Sarah and Jeff a few weeks ago when they were doing a speaking event, because they're both working on their speaker reels now. And I don't know if you had this experience, like, because I've worked with Jeff several times. Jeff's very charismatic, you know what I mean? And it really shows, like, when he's in an interview or camera and stuff like that. But I should have seen this coming, because I just never really worked with Sarah in this setting before. Because, like, prior when I worked with her, she was working at, like, JKCPE, and she was, like, had a very management, type role. And now she's, like, I didn't realize how charismatic Sarah was when she gets into
Oh my
it.
gosh.
You know what I mean?
Are you
she has a
kidding
very
me?
yeah. It's almost scary, because like Jeff is like just like very like I don't know how to put it. Like they're both hyper charismatic, but in such different ways. Like they demand control of the whatever medium that they're in different ways, and it's really cool to see that, especially after working with Jeff for so many years. Like it's cool to see like how other people can really dominate. You know what I mean? In those ways. Yeah.
The environment.
Yeah. I literally I think I was watching her speak at this thing, and I was like literally getting goosebumps when I was listening to that. I was like, oof, you
should have seen her on set, man. She was
yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
It was incredible.
No, but if we end up doing stuff on the East Coast with her for your course that you guys are putting together, you're gonna have to show me some of those clips, so I know what I'm I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're in the process right now doing some posts and all the color and stuff now, but it's I'm excited for that one. That one's going to be a good one.
Cool.
So yeah, what would you say as we sort of wrap up the conversation on interviewing, and then we should also ask each other what we're into right now, because that's what we do on the Heroic Council. So yeah, how would you sort of sum up, somebody is looking to interview somebody, sort of a good wrap up of how best to do that to end up with a good end result?
Yeah, that's so I guess I think personally planning is important. I know like there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this planning. I would, if you have the opportunity to know the people that you're interviewing in advance, that's really helpful. A lot of times on projects, you don't get that opportunity. So, like, if you can do some background research, that's cool. Once again, for me, just because I'm doing video work on a lot of people who may not have a huge, you know what I mean, background online or something like that, like, you don't get that opportunity. But if you can do research, that's great. If you can't do research, just know like what your goal is, you know, what's important to walk away from. I generally have a few different techniques to work with different types of people because there's a lot of different types of people that you interview with. If somebody's very confident on camera or just in general at communicating, like generally like just, you know, that gives you a real opportunity to play around because like they're going to give you good stuff no matter what. So take that opportunity to really like dig in and get a good conversation going. Because you're probably gonna like, you know what I mean, like you're gonna walk out with something. As long as you know what you need, you're gonna walk out with what you need. If somebody is a lot more uncomfortable in camera, then like just make sure you have a list of basics that you need to get out of that interview because it may be hard to get them into that super comfortable like flow state that a lot of other people have, or it may take them longer to get there. So just making sure like I need this, this, and this from this person. And just, you know, get it and, you know, leave them alone because they probably don't want to be on camera at all.
Right.
Yeah. And then, you know, also like, yeah. And then a lot of times it is helpful for those people to be a little bit more scripted, in my opinion. It like, I would definitely try to get them on some, get them through some interesting conversations with them. But it like, you know, a lot of times they feel a lot more comfortable with something like a script that they had to memorize, you know what I mean, and
Right.
lines and stuff like that. So that sometimes like needs to happen, and that's fine too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say too, to piggyback on that, definitely have a mind and a heart to be curious in the conversation. I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
huge. And what we just said before, sometimes just repeating back what you heard is so affirming to the conversation, affirming to each of you who's talking, and also to think ahead, right? Especially in the mind of whoever's going to be seeing this or potentially searching Google to find, you know, that topic. So having that in mind ahead of time, you can create some really, really good social media snippets that'll bring more attention to your conversation. So
Yeah, 100% on all that. Yeah.
yeah,
I feel like if we had to, we could probably write like a pretty substantial book on, you know what I mean? Like, or at least a good checklist. You
there
know
you
what
go.
I mean?
Yeah,
But yeah. But being curious, like you said, is essential for being a good interviewer. Like your interviews are
absolutely.
definitely going to be a lot more superficial if you're like, you know what I mean, not able to like pick people's brains. Yeah.
Exactly. 100%. So this has been such a good conversation, man. What would you say that you are into right now?
Yeah. Right now, I'm reading the Dune series. I was excited for that movie all during the pandemic,
Okay.
and they kept pushing it back, and it was really devastating. And I finally went to see the movie, and I decided to jump into the books right after, and it's all it's cracked up to be. Yeah, no, it's crazy because we've had so much sci-fi over the last. This book was like pre the moon landing, and we've had so much sci-fi since then. But like the amount of good content in here that's still like super interesting and intriguing is really really cool. Yeah, I like the lot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
How about you?
Yeah, for me, I'm actually enjoying like working out recently. It's just been
Cool.
really fun, especially boxing. So I just
Ah,
trained today, which was really cool, and just you know, hitting the bag. I didn't think I would be so into it, but it really is a great way to get the heart moving and all that kind of stuff, and the sweat, and to hit something. I don't know what it is about that, but I appreciate that. I think some of my friends think I'm violent, but I'm not violent. I'm like really a lover. I don't have any, but I do enjoy it. It's such like a stress relief too. So I look forward to
yeah.
that on Mondays when I get to work out. So yeah.
How did you get into that? How'd you get into boxing?
Well, a friend of mine, he puts together like a women's workout group on
Yeah.
Saturdays. And so one of the days that I came out there, he says, all right, we're going to do a little boxing now. Let's, put on some gloves. And when they did it, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Because funny story, growing up, my brother and I, we would, play fight and stuff like that around the house. And we wanted some boxing gloves so that we could box. But my mom only bought us one pair of gloves. So we would literally put one hand, put one glove on and put the other arm around your back, and then we would box like that, to play against each other. And that was about it. I never put on another boxing glove since then. So to do it just kind of felt like being a kid again. Now I got two gloves, so I can like actually play around. So and now it's just a part of how I get to work out and stay fit. So I've been beefing up over here, man.
Oh, look at that. Damn. Yeah.
No, but
is your let's call it your fitness arc, is that new, or has it been a lifelong thing?
What do you mean? Like being
like have you I don't know, I go through phases, like where I'll like work out for like 2 years in a row and then it'll drop off, and then at some point I'll pick it back up and I'll be with it for like a few years.
I would say that as far as like boxing and going to the gym regularly, this has probably been about a year. But before then, I would play like pickleball, which is actually a very
cool sport,
yeah. So I would play that. And then before pandemic happened, I was in a part of a couple of women's basketball leagues that I would play in. So I enjoy more of like playing sports and stuff to stay active, as opposed to like I'm gonna go to the gym and just lift weights. It's like I don't get excited about that. I like to engage with other people. And
I we're trying to wrap this up, but I actually started Pilates like a few weeks ago, and the whole reason is so it's more complex than I thought it was going to be. Not like I had low expectations going in or anything like that, but just like the whole part of the reason I wanted to go in is I feel like my posture took a real hit during the pandemic, just because I've been inside and and I always heard that this was like it was both great strength training, but also like really, really, really good for your posture. And I'm finding out like just how bad my posture is when I attempt to, do what Pilates is requiring me to do. And it's so like, everything's so like very subtle and like, and it's cool. I like it. It's expensive, but it's cool. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. You're getting into that. Keep me posted on how that develops for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. This has been a wonderful conversation. We got to like kind of interview each other here. So that was pretty cool. But
that was cool.
Thank you all for joining us for this conversation. This is the Heroic Council.
By the way, before we go, I want to think one cool. That was cool. One cool thing that might be neat in the future is if we do just pick a random conversation about something the other person does or something, and then interview them for the length of the podcast, and just to like with like little intermissions to be like, see what I just did there, blah blah blah. Like that would be good. Yeah.
We'll tag Jeff on that. That'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Portia.
This has been great.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for joining us here on another episode of the Heroic Council. You can tune in every Monday at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time and catch us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, all under the Superhero Institute, or you can just search for Heroic Council using your favorite search engine called Google. You can also subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting platform by searching Heroic Council on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and all over the place. Be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. And if you love the show, be sure to share it with someone that you love or even somebody that you just like a lot. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.